Good morning, everyone. It's Thursday, March 25th, 8:45 a.m. And this is a meeting of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. It's a bit of a special meeting for us because we don't often get to sit down with representatives of all three members of our congressional delegation and their staff. And so there has been, I guess, one of the understatements of the year would be there's been a lot going on in Washington, D.C. Of interest to the people of the state of Vermont, particularly as it relates to work in this committee. And one of the reasons we really wanted to have you folks in was so that we could all come up to speed, or at least begin to come up to speed on what's happening in Washington that creates opportunities for genuine engagement with our congressional delegation over support for various programs that we're doing. And in particular, I'd asked folks today to focus on opportunities as they relate to energy. We're doing a lot of work on weatherization and energy savings. And then secondly, as we were chatting just before going online, water is a ongoing interest of this committee and always topical. And right now there's a little flare up of discussion going on in the state over some issues on wastewater and stormwater and infrastructure. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming in. And Lauren Hurl has often been a bit of a liaison. She's kept me apprised of some of the things going on in your offices. So I'd like to ask Lauren to be our to tee off the morning's discussions, and then I'd love to hear from each of your offices to hear about opportunities and to answer questions. And I'll be very candid about one thing. You know, I feel like support from the delegation is something we earn by basically making something akin to a solid grant proposal. And having been on the other side, awarding grants, you want to look for a project that's going to succeed or has a good likelihood of success, that addresses a well-identified need and is well formulated. So we've been working on things related to, again, weatherization and water that I think probably fit the bill. Or if I were to borrow a hat from 10 years ago, I'd say we've assembled some shovel-ready projects. And so with that, you know, we'd love to learn more about the funding opportunities from DC and talk a little bit about what we have, and knowing that this is just a first conversation to get working on these things together. So with that, Ms. Hurl, good morning.
Good morning. It's so nice to see you all. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. So thanks so much for the opportunity to join you all. And for the record, my name is Lauren Hurl, and I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Conservation Voters. And I think you're all familiar with us, but VCV is a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that works to advocate for strong environmental laws and help elect pro-environment lawmakers. And one of the things we do every year is develop an environmental common agenda to highlight the top legislative priorities of the environmental community each year. And this year, you know, the environmental community really is focused on this once in a generation federal funding opportunity that we'll be diving into today. You know, we see this as a critical moment to make strategic, forward-looking investments in priorities like climate action and clean water that we're focused on here in this committee. So I really appreciate you convening this conversation and allowing me the chance to share some of the work that the environmental community has been doing related to federal funding. And we've been approaching this through the lens of how the state can take advantage of one-time funding to make big strides towards meeting commitments the state's already made, like hitting the targets established in the Global Warming Solutions Act, the targets established through the Vermont Clean Water Act, and so on. And it's just worth noting that we see, you know, really exciting opportunities for this one-time funding, and also recognize that we need to keep working together toward long-term sustainable funding for all of these programs. So our work in the environmental community is really focused on two paths. We've been developing a range of ideas and advocating for investments with our federal delegation, and are really grateful for all the time and effort that they've been putting in with us. And the other is working with you and your colleagues on strategically directing federal funds that have already come into the state. And most of that work so far has been with your House colleagues as they've been putting together the initial budget and transportation bills. And a lot of that now, of course, is heading your way. So we've been really looking at a range of investment strategies that we believe can help build more affordable, less polluting, healthier, more equitable, and more resilient communities while creating good paying jobs, all things that you all focus on a lot. So we've been looking at federal funding really, the federal team here can talk in more detail about the various pots of money that are available or that might become available, and the various strings attached. But we've been thinking about the in-hand stimulus funding, as well as the FY22 federal budget and any upcoming infrastructure bills if they are to pass, and what opportunities they might present. So we've sent 2 letters to the federal delegation that I did send to Jude. So hopefully those can make it up on your committee website if they haven't already. So a whole bunch of ideas that we pulled together for investments that we believe that the federal government could make to essentially, in most cases, increase funding of existing successful programs. And by ramping up those programs now, we can get to work on the long backlog of projects. One of those letters was from coming up on a year ago, although a lot of the ideas I think are still really relevant, and it had a suite of climate, transportation, land conservation, and clean water program investment ideas. And there's a more updated one from just February of this year, focused more narrowly on water and land conservation ideas. And we're actively working right now on a more climate focused one that we'll be submitting soon, and we'll happily share that with the Senate Natural Resources Committee as soon as that's ready. So not going to, of course, walk through those extensive lists of ideas, but I encourage you to check them out. And if there are ideas that look of interest to you all, anything that you want to learn more about, we would happily, of course, as you said, continue this conversation and bring in the various partners that are really experts that have helped to develop those various proposals. Knowing that you do have some important decisions coming up in short order around the money that is in hand or on its way to the state already, I did just want to spend a couple of minutes briefly talking through some of the recommendations we've been making on the House side that are very much in line with the work you all have been doing. And it would be helpful to ground truth from our federal team who's here, what opportunities they see in that as well. So a big focus, very much in line with what you all have been working on this year, is a suite of recommendations that we've been making related to significantly increasing funding for weatherization strategies. You all know well the many benefits of that: long-term money saving, energy reducing, health improvements for homes. So we really, like you all, have been focused on the existing programs that have proven successful and are looking at how we can ramp up investments in them. So for example, we made a recommendation to the House Appropriations Committee to expand the successful indoor air quality program to more buildings like courthouses, prisons, childcare facilities, and long-term care facilities. We also recommended building on the state energy management program concept, ideally through a revolving loan fund to allow Efficiency Vermont to do comprehensive weatherization, heating and cooling, and indoor air quality work on a wide variety of buildings. And we think this should be eligible for municipalities, public schools, state colleges and universities, and the state government. And I'll be happy to submit my testimony in writing. I was just finishing it up as we got together, but we'll happily share this with you all so you have it in writing. And as you all know well, we have this important moment and opportunity and need to expand home weatherization programs. So we've been recommending a significant increase in investments in programs like low-income weatherization and the Weatherization Assistance Program administered by our community action agencies, as well as low to moderate income programs and incentives and market rate programs that are administered by Efficiency Vermont. You know, and knowing that workforce development is another piece of this that you all have been focused on and that is so important. We've been recommending investing in workforce development, recruitment, training, and coordination of programs and program delivery and NeighborWorks of Western Vermont to add more certified energy auditors to expand their successful Heat Squad program, and looking at innovative financing strategies like you all have to help leverage affordable private capital as well. Another piece of this that I just wanted to mention is we have been spending some time thinking about how we can, how the state can help local communities. So, you know, I'm on city council, was able to join Congressman Welch, and Rebecca Ellis was there last night, and talking about the money coming into our cities and towns, and how is the state able to offer really attractive matching opportunities and providing technical assistance and support to communities to be able to know what money is out there and how to successfully access it, so that this money that's coming into towns is also able to be kind of invested in really thoughtful, strategic ways that are meeting multiple community benefits. So we've been thinking about things like increasing staffing at regional planning commissions to work with municipalities to identify and access energy efficiency, transportation innovation, and other opportunities. We've also been working with the Transportation Committee and a bunch of ideas in there, which I know is of interest to all of you, a little outside of your wheelhouse. So I'll just move to clean water and then wrap up. And so, in clean water, we do have, because we've established the Clean Water Fund, we have the opportunity to just increase funding, which is, in the budget that you all see, there's some additional funding going into the Clean Water Fund. And so there's, the whole system for prioritizing and allocating funds that way. We do also want to make sure that we're putting money, the nutrient reduction that is focused on is, of course, critically important. We also know that there's a whole suite of just water infrastructure needs in communities across the state. So are also looking at, how are we increasing investments in our drinking water revolving loan fund, clean water revolving loan fund. And I think there are some important questions and answers that we'll need from the federal guidance when that's available about, how some of this money can be spent, and we need to keep an eye on state matching requirements for federal funds. I think that can become a big issue with a lot of the clean water programs, making sure we have both state and federal dollars so we don't lose out on federal funding opportunities. But we know that there's, of course, a huge backlog of water infrastructure needs and a great opportunity to get a lot of work done in the coming years with this one-time funding. And in this area, we're also looking at similarly where there's opportunities for state matching or state technical expertise to help towns address either current or requirements that we know are coming soon, like the municipal roads general permit, the Better Roads program, and the 3-acre requirements that are all on their way to communities near you. So just wrapping up, we know, and we've all worked together for many years on so many really important state needs. And we see this as such an exciting opportunity to make strategic investments that can help make our infrastructure more resilient and help spur the kind of transformation of systems that we've been talking about for years, and that we know over and over again, the wall we hit is lack of funding. And so, being able to jumpstart some of these, and I think the proven success that we'll see will also help spur them to have more of that long-term investment. So that's how we're really thinking about it, and really eager to hear from our federal delegation staff. And thanks for bearing with me through a lot of ideas, and look forward to working with all of you to explore ways we can work together to turn this current crisis into an opportunity to set our communities up to be healthier and more resilient. And thank you so much for your time and for hosting this conversation together.
Thank you, Lauren, for getting the ball rolling and for your work. You're like a spark plug for firing off, keeping the engine running. And so it's helpful to the committee that you regularly come in and help us keep apprised of things going on outside our committee that are of interest. So I'd like to turn next to Mr. Barry. Good morning. Thank you for coming in. And, I think I'd like to ask a question. It's a little almost embarrassing to start with this, but I'll just fess right up. This is my 13th year in the legislature, and I probably have seen you once or twice a year, most all my years, but I still don't quite know, from your point of view, if I think of the legislature here as kind of a client of sorts, what's the ideal way for us to behave as a client in order to be good partners to you all? I don't like the notion that we just show up to talk about, well, how could we get money and funding for something that is important, but I think there's more of a partnership to it than that. And so, what helps us be successful partners with you all? I think that's part of what's underlying today's discussion.
Well, the part of the conversation about money is a frequent one, and so I think I speak for all of us to say we're always open to those conversations, and it's a large part of what we do, bringing us questions about what's possible, and then projects is always helpful. And so, please bring them on. Good ideas for authorizing legislation that may play out better nationally than at the state level, or where we may need to pick up some priorities. Just always communicate with us. And it comes right down to each of our bosses does a lot of constituent casework. And often if we see a problem with a constituent or a number of them, it suggests where funding or authorizing legislation needs to be directed. So always feel free to reach out to any of us on constituent issues. Just stay in touch, whether it's coming into the committee or contacting us directly. We all work on outreach in Vermont. And so, if you help us be ears on the ground in Vermont, that's a good way to go. And then, never hesitate to ask for us to come into committees like today.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks. So the floor is yours.
I'll move along fairly quickly. I think where we're going to break it up today is I'm going to talk about appropriations and earmarks, and I'll tell you why that is in a minute, the annual funding cycle for the federal government, and then hand it off to Haley from Senator Sanders' office, who's going to talk some about the budget reconciliation package. I mean, not package, but process, which is how the $1.9 trillion bill was just passed, and where we may have the largest opportunities going forward for big infrastructure. And then Rebecca from the Congressman's office can take a little bit deeper dive into what is possible and what is in the recently passed bill. So I'm gonna move quickly and leave time for questions, hopefully. Again, I'll introduce myself. Tom Barry with Senator Leahy's office. I've been with the senator for over 10 years, and I've been doing congressional work for over 20. So kind of in a rut in this job. Senator Leahy, as I think probably everybody on the call knows, is the most senior member of the U.S. Senate and the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, and his other two committees of jurisdiction are Agriculture and Judiciary. And those are all issues dear to his heart. Cutting right into sort of what the toolbox looks like and what's possible in funding some of what we've talked about through the annual appropriations cycle. Real quick, Appropriations 101, and I think people know some of this, I'll fly through it. There's 12 funding bills that fund the federal government each year, and they are written through the Appropriations Committee. These are must-pass bills, and they are must-pass bipartisan bills. And so we can talk about lots of other stuff that may or may not happen, but we will pass these bills every year. We came out of the longest government shutdown in U.S. history recently, but we did ultimately pass these bills. So they will fund the federal government. They don't change very quickly. Huge new opportunities are often not present in the bills. And that can be a blessing and a curse. 5 years ago, we were all running around with our hair on fire because incoming President Trump had proposed a budget that absolutely gutted everything that this committee focuses on. Clean air, clean water, energy, everything, zeroed it out in the budgets. Well, guess what? that was dead on arrival on the Hill. These are bipartisan bills. Ultimately, we passed spending bills that looked a whole lot like the ones that we passed during the Obama administration. And there was some erosion over those years, but we got the bills passed. So we've got the advantages of there must pass. Senator Leahy is the chairman of the committee. We can accomplish a lot. But on the other hand, we don't accomplish generally very big new stuff in a given year, whether it's gutting everything that we care about or coming in and funding, fundamental change to how we do business in this country. In working on these bills, all the congressional offices have their ears open to priorities in Vermont, and they can support national programs, use Leahy as an example, or home weatherization as an example. I know Senator Leahy each year strongly supports the home weatherization program nationally. Those funds go out by way of formula, so the amount that Vermont gets, if that increases, the increase to Vermont is relatively small, but then the senator can come in and look for a cutout for Vermont. As an example, we have a lot of vermiculite, asbestos contaminant in insulation. When you come in to weatherize a home in Vermont, you may run into $50,000 of additional cost if you hit vermiculite or whatever the number would be. So the senator in the appropriations process each year has been building in vermiculite remediation, which would not otherwise be there, that helps to facilitate weatherization in Vermont. Just one example of that. And clean water and energy, we've got a lot of line items there that the senator supports. Two lines alone that he's been developing over the years brought in more than $20 million for clean water in FY21, the bills we passed in December. And so we have great opportunities for Vermont, but that's not going to change a whole lot going into FY22. And so, to get kind of down to where we are in the process right now, FY21 was adopted just before Christmas. At the staff level, we're pushing out the FY21 programs. Just because it's in the spending bill doesn't mean it rolls out smoothly. We've got a number of Vermont projects in there, including a grid scale energy storage project, some other energy stuff, a lot of clean water money, et cetera. So we're pushing that out while at the same time, we're collecting priorities and projects for FY22 and what that looks like. So on clean water, for instance, some of these infrastructure projects that you're working on, we can find a home for some of that stuff in the FY22 spending bills. And some of them we can frankly find a home for in what was just passed in FY21. And so I'm in conversations with the state and getting lists of projects and open to whatever others want to provide. With all that said, let's talk briefly about earmarks, and then I'll hand it off because our time is limited and we want to leave time for questions. Earmarks are congressionally directed spending, the opportunity for a member of Congress to very specifically identify projects and spending bills. And some of you may be familiar with them, although it's been 10 years since we've had earmarks. And Senator Leahy is a big supporter of earmarks. He has the opportunity there to not generally say we should spend money on Lake Champlain in New York and Vermont, or we should spend the state revolving fund nationally, we should spend money on clean water, but to say we're going to go build a sewage treatment plant here, we're going to fix a stormwater system over there, name the town, et cetera. And all of the members used to have that opportunity. Earmarks went away 10 years ago. They're hopefully coming back. The senator is a strong supporter of earmarks, and that will give the very senior Vermont delegation the opportunity to call out individual projects in these spending bills. Going back to where I started, that's not going to be a game changer nationally on how we do energy and climate, because these bills don't change a whole lot, but it gives the opportunity and a great opportunity for a small state with a senior delegation to pick off a number of really good projects. And so the House has voted to bring the earmarks back, and Rebecca can talk more about that. They have a process in place. The Senate has not yet brought earmarks back. Senator Leahy hopes that we will. It's likely that we will. And so where there are potential earmark projects, certainly communicate with Senator Leahy's staff, myself. We're collecting what those may look like. We don't have a formal process yet. We don't know what the information is going to be exactly, but we're collecting those for annual appropriations consideration. What does an earmark project look like? I think it was said sort of before, is ideally a discrete project in both temporally and spatially, meaning it's something you can visualize and pick off in 1 year, 2 years of funding, It doesn't have to be infrastructure. It could be program, but where you can accomplish something measurable as sort of a standalone project in a year or two. Because if you stand up a program and then you fail to get the earmark in the second or third or fourth year, people are unemployed. You don't complete your work. And then as far as scale, it'd be unusual to ask for an earmark of less than $1 million. In the past, we didn't see many that went much more than $10 million. So we're not going to pick off 120,000 home weatherizations through the earmark process, but we might take a big bite out of vermiculite remediation while we do that. And so we're hopeful of getting earmarks back, talk to staff, and think about what an earmark project looks like. And with that, I'm going to shut up and hand it off to Haley to talk a little bit more about budget reconciliation, where we're accomplishing some big things right now, which I'll take questions later.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm making notes while you're talking. I've been receiving emails lately in anticipation of your arrival about discrete projects, just like you're listing. So thanks so much. All right. Okay, so over to can you help me with your last name? Is it Pirro? Is that how you say it?
My name is Haley. For the record, my name is Haley Pirro, and I'm a Vermont outreach representative for Senator Bernie Sanders.
Great, thank you. Good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today about federal funding, particularly as it relates to your jurisdiction. As Tom mentioned, I can provide some remarks about the budget process and the budget reconciliation process in particular. First, I would just say, as chair of the Senate Budget Committee, Senator Sanders has been very focused on dealing with the immediate relief that's needed and delivering that relief to Vermonters as it relates to the COVID-19 crisis, which we certainly see as both a health and an economic crisis. As we look toward recovery, he knows that that'll require critical long-term investment, and also recognizes that there are a lot of opportunities there and that we need to take some important steps to address natural resources and energy issues. So as I mentioned, I'd like to share some information about budget committee processes and how they may play out into future federal investments. As you may know, and I think Tom alluded to, the American Rescue Plan and a potential climate and infrastructure package have or could go through Senator Sanders' Budget Committee. And that's because budget legislation is given privilege status and that it only requires a 50-vote majority, which is important in the Congress as it's comprised today. And I know you're interested in sort of looking ahead and what those possibilities may be. Details are certainly still to come on next steps for the fiscal year 2022 budget and the reconciliation process. You may have heard it referred to as Reconciliation 2. And the next major priority Congress is likely to focus on is infrastructure and climate. President Biden has indicated his interest in following the American Rescue Plan, again, past the reconciliation, with a longer-term economic recovery package. And that would be something that's looking to strengthen the economy, address climate, and also try to reduce economic inequality at the same time. These are certainly priorities that Senator Sanders shares. And what we're hearing, what's anticipated is that the president would lay out his plan. That'll likely be via an address to a joint session of Congress, probably sometime next month. I have not heard a specific date. And that plan will then be informed by his Build Back Better plan. And according to media reports, there's interest in trying to move something in a bipartisan fashion. However, to get to that bipartisan support, we anticipate that Congress may need to break that package into smaller pieces of legislation. And it sounds like we would likely tackle infrastructure first if it is broken down. And then if that bipartisan approach is unsuccessful, budget reconciliation could be used. And Senator Sanders, in his role as chair of the Budget Committee, would lead that process. In terms of climate and infrastructure and sort of what it could look like, Senator Sanders' priorities include a really strong federal investment in our nation's infrastructure with a strong focus on water infrastructure, and also a really transformative federal investment in energy efficiency and renewable energy. So aligning with a lot of the goals that we know Vermont has. And as I think Lauren mentioned, we're hopeful that this work could create a lot of good paying jobs for people, and that's a really important component of it. And I would just, close by saying that as with the American Rescue Plan, Senator Sanders will strongly advocate for a package that matches the moment and the scope of the challenges that we face. And given his role on the Budget Committee and also as a senior member of the Senate's 2 committees dealing with both energy and environment, he's particularly committed to fighting for the federal resources that Vermont needs to address climate change and other environmental challenges. I would briefly mention, as it may be of interest to the committee, that there is a water infrastructure bill in the I believe it was recently marked up, and that includes some provisions from the Water Resources Development Act and also from Senator Sanders' Water Act. And I'm happy to follow up with details on that. So that's another opportunity for investment and something we'll continue to push. If I may, I'll pass it over to Rebecca, who I think is going to provide more details on the recently passed American Rescue Plan.
Sure. Can I ask a government 101 question?
Certainly.
So can you distinguish between what since we don't do it this way in Vermont, what's covered by the appropriations bill versus what's covered by the budget bill?
Sure. So under normal order, as Tom mentioned, the president will, present a budget proposal. We sort of see that as a way to signal priorities. And then typically the budget committee would sort of set top line numbers and work within larger buckets. And then the appropriations bills really specify the funding levels. What's somewhat unique, although certainly not unprecedented, it's been used before, is the budget reconciliation tool to move things through with that simple majority. So when we're looking to do really big transformative things, that's been used, and that's how the American Rescue Plan was passed. So we'll still be moving forward with appropriations, and Tom, I don't know if you want to share any details about that, but we'll still be doing that and submitting our request to the Appropriations Committee.
Yeah, ideally under the normal order of business, it doesn't always happen this way, but the Budget Committee will establish the total top or bottom line that we're going to spend to, and then the Appropriations Committee allocates that out to everything the government does, and makes all the specific spending decisions in the 12 bills.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Ellis, good to see you again.
It's very nice to be here. And for the record, my name is Rebecca Ellis, and I'm the state director for Congressman Peter Welch. And thank you for inviting the staff from the federal delegation to meet with you this morning to chat and to share ideas and to talk about solutions to some of the biggest problems facing Vermont right now in the climate and environment sector. So as you might know, Congressman Welch he's chair of the High Performance Building Caucus in the House, and he's also a member of the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Caucus. And the issues that you asked us to testify about today are front and center for him. He's been fighting on these issues at the federal level for a long time. Last year, he introduced the Hope for Homes Act, which in some ways is similar to what you're trying to achieve in S109. The HOPE part was a workforce training part of the bill, and the homes part of that bill was to build on energy efficiency rebate program, similar to what Efficiency Vermont has, but to put it at a federal scale. And that legislation was actually included in an infrastructure bill that the House Energy and Commerce Committee took up this week. It's called the LIFT Infrastructure Act, which, depending on how things go with President Biden's plan, it could be subsumed in that bigger effort. But the Energy and Commerce Committee in the US House has been working nonetheless on its own infrastructure package. So for today, what I was proposing to do was just do a deep dive, but into only a very small pool of the American Rescue Plan Act, which from now on out, I'm going to call ARPA. And to talk about the specific uses of those funds. We are still waiting for guidance from the US Treasury, which will give us a lot more parameters about what's going to be possible and how that money can be used. But I did think it would be useful for this committee to see the actual language. It's very broad. The entire Vermont delegation worked very hard to make this money that's coming to Vermont as flexible as possible, so that you, the Vermont legislature, can prioritize and put the money where it's needed the most. So if it's okay, I'm going to pull up on the screen the two-pager that I submitted late last night to Jude. Okay,
great.
She's made me a co-host of this meeting, so let's see if I can do this.
Yeah. Don't take us shopping, or who knows where we'll end up.
Who knows? Okay, I have to press the share button. All right, now this should actually, do you see my screen?
Yes, looks good, thank you.
Great, and this should also be on Senate Natural Resources website. I'll be talking about the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, which is HR 1319, and I've put in a link there if you want to look at the congress.gov website. And this became law just a couple weeks ago on March 11th. And I have pulled out some excerpts from the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds section. So to give you a snapshot of what's coming to Vermont through this section, the Coronavirus Relief Funds, there's a total state, county, and local of 1.35 billion. So what's going directly to the state in this fund is 1 billion, and we'll talk about the uses for that. There's also a section called the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund, and that's 112 million coming to Vermont under that fund. And many thanks to Senator Leahy's office for making sure this got in here. It was originally intended to be primarily for broadband projects, but you'll see the language is pretty broad, so I'm not sure what the US Treasury rules will look like for how flexible this money can be used. And then there are the county and local funds. So there's 19 million Metro Fund. Vermont only has one metropolitan city, Burlington. So that is the allocation for Burlington. There's $57 million for what's called the non-entitlement municipality fund. So either you're Metro or you're a non-entitlement municipality. So every other municipality in Vermont is a non-entitlement municipality fund. So that 57 million is going directly to Vermont's towns and presumably to its villages, though again, we're still waiting for guidance from US Treasury as to exactly how that would be split. And then there's also, Vermont gets 121 million in a county fund. And then there's a special provision in the law that says in states that don't have general units of government at the county level, such as Vermont, and I think there's only 4 states like that, the ARPA mandates that the money goes directly to the local units of general government on a per capita basis. So we are still waiting again for US Treasury to tell us exactly the distribution of money to towns and exactly how the county money will be distributed to towns, but just wanted to give you the big numbers that will be coming into Vermont. So then the uses of that fund. So the uses of the fund are the same for both the state and the the metro cities and the non-entitlement communities. And they're basically going to be 4 uses of those funds. So this is in section 602C1. And their uses are A, B, C, and D. And so use A is probably what a lot of people are familiar with. We're basically calling this any COVID-related costs. But the specific language is to respond to the public health emergency with respect to the coronavirus disease or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. I believe that language is quite broad, though it doesn't include everything, and I'm sure we'll be getting guidance from US Treasury. To go back actually to a question that Senator Bray had about how can you be a good client to us? One of the things that happened with the CARES Act is that there was legislation passed by Congress. US Treasury came out with some guidance that we did not feel, and I think I can speak for the delegation, we did not feel exactly reflected the intent of Congress. So we worked with Treasury to get new guidances published, and that would allow for more flexibility. So that is one thing that we as a delegation can do. So moving to bucket B, I'm going to just go quickly here. This is basically providing pay to workers who are performing essential work. And so it's premium pay to essential workers, hazard pay. So the state could use the money to pay for a hazard pay program. And then I'll go down to C and D. C is to deal with reductions in state revenue or municipal revenue that were due to COVID. So the exact language, which is important, is for the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue of such state, territory, or tribal government due to the COVID-19 public health emergency, relative to the revenues collected in the most recent full fiscal year of the state, territory, or tribal government prior to that emergency. So basically, it's looking at the gap in revenues for this. Well, it's going to be the fiscal year, but so I guess it'd be fiscal year 19 compared to fiscal year 20, if I'm getting my fiscal years correct. And then in bucket D, which I think is probably particularly important to this committee, it's very broad. It says that state can use this money to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. And then to quickly close it out, I mentioned earlier that Vermont's getting $112 million in the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund. This is money that will, the US Treasury is going to write guidelines about, basically it'll be a grant program that the state implements. So we're still waiting to see what Treasury gives us in terms of what is this grant program going to look like. And originally I think this was intended to be for broadband, but the actual language seems broader to me. Just jumping down to the final 5 lines. This is for making payments to states, territories, and tribal governments to carry out critical capital projects directly enabling work, education, and health monitoring, including remote options in response to the public health emergency with respect to coronavirus disease, COVID-19. So with that, I think I'm going to close my testimony and be happy, along with the other delegation staff, to answer questions.
Great, thank you. So let me pause, turn to the committee, and ask if there are some questions at this point. And we have Ms. Ellis's document as well in our resources on the committee page if people want to be able to continue to refer to that. So just so folks know they have another way to keep looking at this stuff. Senator Westman or Senator Campion?
No, thank you so much, though, former Representative Ellis. It's great to see you, truly. Thank everyone, but it is really great to see Rebecca here. So thank you for that. And so glad that you're in that office, and you've been incredibly helpful to me as constituent issues have popped up over the years. So thank you.
So Senator Westman, then Senator McCormick.
I have a couple of questions. So the issue of county government, because we haven't been able to quite figure out exactly how this is going to work. As you indicated, we have very little county government here. And, but we do have some. And the question really is, will those entities that are at county government get that money first, and then what they don't use, it will be distributed to the locals? Or do we have any indication of how that's going to work?
So we're waiting for the guidance from US Treasury. The statutory language says that if a state does not have county governments that are units of general local government, that the money then passes down to what are the units of general local government in that county. I think the understanding was that Vermont's county governments, which deal with the court systems and the sheriffs, they're important, but those are not general or units of general local government. It could be that Treasury will do something like what you're suggesting, which would be to split up the money more if you had some kind of county government, but not a full county government. You know, how do you deal with that? So I can't give you a definitive response. I think the assumption was that the money would not go to the county, the existing county government in Vermont, because it's not a unit of general local government, and then it would all pass down. But
yeah, well, you know, that's been real, because our solid waste district wants money now, and so there's all of this going on that we can't, you know. Second question, we have, and this is a concern of mine when we've been talking about this in our state Senate Appropriations Committee. So we've got the league developing assistance to towns. We've got the regional planning commissions organizing for assistance to towns. And what we don't want is 3 or 4 different groups all developing the same assistance to towns and charging at different rates. It would be much better if that organization of the guidance to towns was all formulated in a way where we weren't falling over on each other. Is there, and there doesn't seem to be any way in this that we can help give instructions to towns that is meaningful. So has anybody at the federal level thought about that? Do you know?
You know, Senator Leahy has communicated with Secretary Yellen, and his staff has talked with Treasury, encouraging the greatest flexibility in the rules. They're probably going to take close to the full 60 days to write the rules. But because of what you're talking about, how nuanced this gets very quickly in delivering the assistance to municipalities and jurisdictions in Vermont, ideally, Treasury won't provide any more guidance than is necessary, and then the Vermont legislature and administration can, you know, arrive at the most efficient means of delivering these funds in Vermont. You know, the municipalities in Vermont are subdivisions of the state government and under that jurisdiction. So hopefully the state will be prepared to deliver that in an equitable way, and hopefully Treasury will put the dollars out with maximum flexibility for that to occur.
Because I will say what we've been worried about in Senate appropriations here is that we have state agencies that try to offer guidance, and then if we have them, we have the league, we have the regional planning commissions, it becomes, you know, a little bit of a hodgepodge around all of that. And if we had a state agency that was going to take the lead on something, we'd want them all to coordinate. And we have no ability to instruct anybody around any of that.
Yeah, if I can also jump in to build on what Tom said. The money is very flexible within the constraints given in the statute. Lauren did mention one idea that I hadn't thought of before, but could be one way for the state to try to influence municipal spending, which is through incentives, through a matching program. You could match, say for example, one of the issues, Senator Bray, you shared with us was the combined sewer overflow repairs that need to be done. And that seems like that fits under the water, sewer, or broadband authority in this bill. Both the municipalities and the state will be getting that money and that authority. And if you wanted to influence municipalities to spend their money in that way, you could set up a matching program, that the state can use 3 of its dollars for the municipalities $1 or whatever the ratio is, something like that. But I don't think you're going to be able to direct them, Senator Westman, to spend the money in a specific way, though I understand completely your desire to have efficiencies of scale and to coordinate the spending.
Yeah, it's not want to tell them what to do, but when they're, we do the administrative side and the advice side, there's, it seems kind of counterintuitive to have multiple groups doing the same thing. And so that's one of the things that we've been looking at. And if you're talking about us using our general fund state dollars to create a match, that becomes trouble. If within the relief package, some of the monies that we have ability to be able to use in that area, that might be a different thing.
Right. And I was definitely referring to the latter, to the relief monies that you've gotten. Yeah.
Please.
Let me also mention, I didn't mention this earlier, the timeline for spending this money is 3.5 years. You haven't, so there is some time to spend the money, though. I imagine most municipalities have already, and maybe the legislature has spent the money 5 times over. So, but there is time to think about how to spend the money wisely. I should also mention, since there's a pause, that when the municipalities spend the money and the state, I think you can be assured that Treasury will also be setting up an auditing program, and they will be checking back to see if the state and the municipalities followed the guidance and spent the money where they're supposed to send it. And that might be a place where the RPCs or BLCT could definitely help out the municipalities.
Well, yes, but therein lies a piece of exactly what I'm talking about. If you have a state agency is is giving advice, we have the LTC giving advice, we have the planning commission's giving advice, and they are some coordination between all of that and how the towns do that. It would be much better if that was all coordinated, particularly around the auditing, things like the auditing, which are the administrative side of helping people through this. Thank you. Yeah, and like Brian, you've been always very helpful when I've asked. So
well, I'm sure the entire delegation is always very helpful. Yeah, thanks though.
Thank you. Senator McCormick.
Thanks. And I'm not sure who I'm asking, so whoever wants to jump in on this. The issue I'm raising has you've all addressed implicitly in your answers, but I'd like to sort of pull it out and just focus on what are the differences between the last year's federal aid and this, referring to limitations and requirements. Now you've already, for example, if we have 3 years to figure out what to do with this money, that's as opposed to last year where we were told we had to spend it by the end of the year. Also, the definition of COVID related. My view is since the COVID the response to COVID necessitated a shutdown of a big section of our economy, which resulted in a loss of revenue to the state, such that virtually anything is COVID related, because we lost revenues because of COVID. That is not the way last year's aid was structured. But how much latitude do we have now as opposed to last year?
I don't know if I have any good answers, but I would say that you did identify probably the two biggest differences: the extended timeline, and that I think is based on feedback that a lot of states got from constituents, that was a real challenge, and also being able to use it for lost revenue. So I think that those are the clear differences. I think we'll have to wait to see what Treasury identifies as permissible uses. Right now, we just sort of have the legislative language that Rebecca shared. And I think there are opportunities to think creatively, but I think it'll be that Treasury guidance that more explicitly spells out what can it be used for and what it cannot. And as I think Tom mentioned, or Rebecca, we can work with Treasury if there are questions and additional clarity is needed. So I know that's not an answer, but I think that's where we are now.
Well, I think it is an answer. Okay. So in other words, we don't really have a clear, solid rule book yet.
Yeah, we don't yet. I would think that, and that's, Treasury's working on that. And we've collected in our office questions from the legislature, from the administration, and gotten those to Treasury, trying to make sure they answer those questions when they come out with the guidance. But I think the more general answer is that there's a lot more flexibility here. And you mentioned impacted industries. And in the CARES Act, a lot of the funds that were put out to support industries were put out through Small Business Administration programs that were very, very prescribed. The Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL program. And there were just very tight sidebars on how and who could participate in those. A lot of the funds here that are available for impacted industries are put out in a very general way at the discretion of the state. And we'll see what Treasury comes back with, but that's bound to create a more flexible set of circumstances to address impacted industries than the Paycheck Protection Program or the EIDL program did. So I think big picture, we're looking at a more flexible package.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. To follow up on the, Mr. Barry, you were mentioning a 60-day shot clock on writing the rules at Treasury. So did it start on 3/11? So is that by 5/11 we should see rules? Is that the timeline we're on?
Yeah, by putting out there, I'm like, oh, they're going to ask me what the date is. And I believe that's the case. I can confirm it for you. And maybe one of my colleagues has that, but I believe it would have started with the passage of the bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking practically for all of us, May 11th or so, we may well be virtually packing our bags to close up the session and go home. And so I'm trying to think of what can we do that's useful while we're still here, while guidance is still pending. And I don't know that anyone has an answer to that one. Since you don't know the rules and we don't know them either. I'm just trying to think of, there are some things we're doing. For instance, in the weatherization bill, we're setting up an energy savings fund that then is the holding tank for the investments we're proposing. And we've thought about, okay, so that's an orderly process, a fund to which monies can be appropriated. There's guidance for how it gets expended and allocated out to what kinds of projects in the whole ecosystem of weatherization, all the different actors. And then part that was to provide stability, even though the fact that the legislature is going to come and go several times in the next 2 years. So I don't know if that kind of structure is useful in looking for partnering on federal funds, like that having that fund to receive funds and then expend them out is the kind of stability that is helpful when we talk to you, even though we're a part-time legislature. Does that sound useful? Or I don't want to engage in wishful thinking. We want to figure out what really is going to help us be good partners here.
You've got us dumbstruck. I think it might be, it might be a useful planning tool for the legislature. I'm not sure it makes a huge difference on the federal side, because the federal appropriations clearly are federal, they're national, so they're not going to get down to that really specific level. It'll either be, the federal government's giving money to the state of Vermont to allocate, the energy efficiency block grant program, for example, is an example of that, where, and I think a good example of the federal government giving a block of money to the state, but then saying to the state, you figure out how to spend this in the best way. So you could do that either through the way you've set it up with that energy fund, or it could just go directly to a department. So I think it might be useful for the legislature. I'm not sure it makes a big difference on the federal side.
Okay, well, that's helpful to know.
And having had a second to think about it, there is, if you look at the language that Rebecca provided, a required nexus to the COVID pandemic at some level. And so there's probably work that the legislature can do in, through its hearing process and information gathering and analysis process, and perhaps in legislation to recognize some of those impacts in the industries or areas where you believe the money will be best allocated, and sort of establish that those relationships in a way that's public, transparent, and defensible. And so when the dollars start to roll out, that work will have been done to say, yes, outdoor tourism was impacted in this way, or the ability of people to pay energy bills in this way. Here are those links. Yeah. And there's probably mechanisms you can do to establish some of that ahead of knowing exactly what the rules are going to be, because that connection has to be there to the impact of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, this committee doesn't have much of a history of writing findings. It seems like one place where such a thing could be done. And now I'm hearing. Can you hear me? I'll find. So that's helpful. You could capture those relationships and findings, build them, and in essence, do some homework ahead of time for someone who would then be reviewing a bill, auditing a program, something like that, to make sure that the nexus was real from the beginning. Okay, great. Senator McDonald, you've been quiet, but I know you're thinking about stuff over there.
Mr. Chair, this the most recent bill to pass has been, I think with only one exception, the first one we've had in 40 years that's come out to the states that didn't depend on the trickle-down theory, and looked at the folks in this state and other states who'd sort of been watched the previous congressional actions take money from working people and middle class and shovel it to the top. And it's important that happened, and it's long overdue. One of the provisions that we just heard about using, having 3.5 years to use this money wisely, certainly fits with the priority of broadband build out. Last year we had 6 months by the time we were done to spend the money with threatened clawbacks, and our number one priority of broadband, not by the federal definition of 25.3, but symmetrical broadband, the future broadband. fared poorly. 3.5 years gives us an opportunity for building seasons to use it wisely. It would be shameful if we in Vermont did not use money that was not based on trickle down theory uses and continue to shovel it to the people who have been well served in the last several decades. I know that federal legislation has a tough time coming out and saying that out loud and providing guidelines to see that it happens. So you've done your work, and it's up to us to see that that we have the same discipline and fortitude that the Congress did in passing out the bill that we shall either benefit from or squander. So that's my concern. Often when we get into rigmaroles, it's the same folks that walk away with the money and the same ones that sit there and said, how did that happen? And I hope we don't do that again. I'm sure later in the day will be an interesting test of that question. But congratulations to the senators and Congressman Welch, who advised us just a couple of weeks ago to take our broadband money and not use it, Congressman Welch said, to build stuff that's practically obsolete already, and to concentrate on using it only to build the infrastructure of the future. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Senator McDonald. I was just going to ask you what would be on your project list that fits the bill you were describing. So capable broadband for the future being one of the examples. Okay. Senator Westman?
I would suggest that given what was said, if there was any matching monies from us to help communities with sewer projects for upgrades, that would be awesome.
Yeah. I don't know if the delegation's been kept apprised, but there's a housing bill that's on its way to the floor, includes a provision that simply alters how permits are issued at either the municipal or the state level. It's not really related to CSO events for the most part, but it has the specter of making any additional connections whatsoever to sewer systems, to wastewater systems that are on occasion, I don't want to use the word failing, but having CSO events has caused a bit of an uproar. And so, the useful side of an uproar is it brings attention back to an issue that we're making progress too slowly on. And I think it's, so that's something that the committee's going to, I think for the balance of this session, one of the things we really want to use our remaining 6 weeks or so on is wastewater infrastructure, wastewater and stormwater infrastructure, because there's a large need. It's expensive work. It's been ongoing, but the pace of progress is slower than anyone would like. It's a little bit like our state low-income weatherization program. Great program, but based on tax department data from 2 weeks ago, if every eligible home family were to sign up, the waiting list would currently be 49 years long. So we know it's that both are suffering from chronic underfunding. I do have a specific checking in on eligibility sort of thing. I was mentioning at the top that I've heard from 2 towns about projects. One is Virgins, which is home to the unenviable home of wastewater and CSO events. It's been an ongoing issue. They made changes. They'd like to do more. So I'll reach out with more information after. Another was a cooperatively owned trailer park down in Brattleboro, and they have. So I think they have their own private systems, septic systems, basically for the trailer parks. that are requiring relatively expensive upgrades in the neighborhood of, let's say, $400,000. And I said I would check because I didn't know if, even though they are cooperatively owned and it's low income, the fact that it's not municipal infrastructure, does that preclude them from receiving benefits from a program? I know I need to ask the same on our current state programming, but just from your perspective at the federal level, do funds ever flow out to things like trailer parks?
Yeah, let me jump in on this question of wastewater, and I'll get to the trailer park question as well. And we hear constantly, and we're all well aware that there's huge stormwater and wastewater issues that need to be dealt with. There's been some problems in the system in Vermont, in my opinion, in advancing projects to where we can then see them move forward. And towns have had a hard time advancing projects to where they're anywhere near shovel ready. They've been reluctant to do so often because you don't want to bring a bond vote prematurely. And so if I'm aware of a pot of funding for a stormwater or a wastewater project, I don't necessarily have a list or a source to go to and say, okay, is Virgins ready? Is Rutland ready? What does a 3-acre permit compliance look for this class of users? And so I think any work that the state, whether administratively or legislatively, can do to begin to organize that list of projects and encourage towns to advance projects to design. Towns have often been reluctant to do that. Again, you don't want to scare the voters ahead of having that federal grant tied up, but you're not going to tie up the federal grant until you advance the design to some point where you actually can bring a project through there. And so I think it's really important to freshen up that list and push, pull, prod, encourage projects to get more projects into the pipeline, because there really isn't all that much shovel ready out there in Vermont right now that I'm aware of. And we're talking to the ANR about that. And then the other thing that I think needs to occur as these dollars begin to roll out and as we look in annual appropriations for clean water dollars, is a conversation where the congressional and earmarks, because STAG grants will probably come back, and those are earmark funds in the state revolving fund for sewer and water projects. And we don't want to all be tripping over each other here, where Leahy wants to go for a STAG grant for Virgins, but it turns out that Bernie's going there, but the state, and then with the trailer park, it may be USDA rural development, which can work on private lower income infrastructure where the EPA can't. Maybe USDA rural development, which has sewer funds as well, can pick off those private entities like trailer parks. And so I think really organizing this conversation more and ultimately getting from people around the table to say, okay, who's going to deal with the Brattleboro mobile home park? Who's going to deal with Virgins? Where are we going to put our STAG grants? And organize that conversation more, we can have a big impact. But I appreciate the work that you're doing, and it's important if you can help with that.
Okay, well, great. As a matter of fact, just last week, we had Commissioner walk in and Secretary Moore, and one of the things we asked for was a list of water projects. Like if you're going to make your top 20 projects for what's the most, where we have the most need, what's on that list. And then I suppose we can enhance that list by saying, and what's the status in terms of being fundable, relative to pulling funds.
And to make best use of the funds, to have a conversation, because we can bring the Army Corps of Engineers with earmarks into the picture with money too. But of course, the town's going to go to where they can get the biggest grant, the smallest loan, and the best and the smallest local share. And so conversations among the folks who are making decisions on funding are going to be important too, because you can have a bigger impact if you don't have all the towns competing for that one pot of funds that has the smallest local share, which understandably is what they will want to do.
Sure.
So let's stay in touch on that.
Yeah. One quick, just so I understand, are federal funds ever available to help with the studies required to be ready to move, sort of like I don't know what you call it, pre-scoping or a design work, technical analysis, things like that, I think you're right. A town is reluctant to invest. in the engineering work up front that delivers the scary number about how expensive this really is to get started. And it may be that front end work may be pretty expensive before they ever go for a bond.
Yeah, absolutely. The federal funds the state revolving funds can be used to advance projects. There was recently an announcement on the Green Schools Initiative where some of the Leahy Lake Champlain money has advanced design for 3-acre permit compliance for all of the schools and state colleges in the Champlain Basin. That's design work. That's not construction work. Army Corps of Engineers 542 program can also advance design at a different cost share. So yes, short answer. That was a long answer. Short answer is yes, federal funds can advance design.
Okay, great, thanks. Senator Westman?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Senator Campion, anything else coming to mind? Senator McCormick? Okay, and Senator McDonald. All right, well, I think I've asked all my specific questions, and what's the best way for us to stay in touch on this? So we'll do some, I think it sounds practically speaking, a few things. We're getting lists together, prioritizing, so that we can communicate about what in an organized way about what the pool of need is out there, and we'll work with ANR on that, and also through VLCT. So we can do some of that groundwork to help us be ready for future conversations. I think it's also helpful that you're pointing out, help make the nexus between proposals and COVID itself clear, so that it provides a pathway for a genuine, to make us it'll ease future audits if we can say, here's the connection, as opposed to someone 3 years from now trying to figure out exactly why we did that and how we justified it. And so I'll encourage too that the two folks that approached me to help further develop their proposals, so it's something more detailed than we have a long-standing need and how could we engage. So I'll go back and we'll push harder on those. If there's not any, I don't know if there's anything that you came into the room this morning with on your list and the conversation didn't get to cover it yet that you want to wrap up with. Okay.
I would just say thank you, and feel free to stay directly in touch, and we're also happy to have these conversations as a delegation.
Okay. Well, it's great to see you, and it's making me think that one benefit of the Zoom world is you're sort of closer at hand than you ever were before. I always thought of you as all sort of far away. I know that's not true. So now we'll try to make this a more regular thing and keep on working on things together. So thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So committee, we're finished a little early, and that's okay. I did want to go back over a couple of things just to make sure we have. I was rattling through a couple of things at the end. The lists that we had already requested from the ANR seem like they're spot on. Help us make a prioritized list to share with the delegation, and ask on the. I think the other thing is not only identifying stuff on that list, well, what's the status of the project? Like, okay, town X has CSO events, but do they have a design to address them, et cetera? When did they last address them? I'm not been a fan necessarily of findings, but it turns out they may be useful for documenting the nexus between any bill and COVID. And that's it for what I have out of notes for today for things to follow up on. I don't know if anyone else sees it to do based on what we just heard. All right. The other thing I wanted to check in is on, we have a variety of smaller tasks. So we have confirmations to do, and I would propose that we do them in 2 weeks. Thank you for people for signing up. I wanted to check, I got a question from someone about, and I don't know if this is a tradition or not. Does anyone know if it's a tradition that the chair of the committee reports the secretary of the agency?
It should be.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So then I should do that one. I'm happy to do that. I just somehow I'd never noticed that. So thanks for that. So Senator Westman, could you hand off one of your appointees to Senator McCormick, who was going to do Secretary Moore?
Mike Schneider is my constituent, so I would like to do my constituent. If not, Lewis, for 2 winters I stayed in the legislature. I lived with Lewis, so I'm fine with doing both or doing just one.
Okay. Well, Senator McCormick.
Yeah, what I had said for the committee's edification is I had said to the chair that I liked them all. So since other people had preferences, I was happy to bat cleanup. In other words, whoever was left after people chose their preferences. I have no problem with Senator Westman doing both. It's less work for me. I'm willing to do whatever I'm asked, but
okay.
If you're not asking.
Right. Well, so I guess we're the list is taken care of. Thank you. So Senator Campion has Commissioner Walk. Senator Westman has Commissioners Snyder and Porter. I'll do Secretary Moore. Thank you, Senators McCormick and McDonald.
So normally the paperwork, we would have to carry the paperwork to the clerk's office. Is it just being transferred? How is this going to work?
Yeah, so Jude is here. I wanted to ask, because usually, right, we would have, I think the letters get handed out to the clerk on the floor. They come downstairs. We make the calls, write on the vote, bring it back up. I don't know where those letters are physically.
I've downloaded them from the web.
Okay.
And Secretary Moore sent her resume and I forwarded it to you, Senator Ray.
Yep.
I haven't gotten any others yet, but as I do, I will forward them to the appropriate people.
Okay, great. So let's, we'll get the resumes in. People can read. I'll check back in with you in a week and see if you feel like you're pretty much all set. Then we'll schedule committee time to hold the votes. And then I'd like to send the 4 of them up as a batch, whatever that means in the electronic age. So we'll figure that out. I'll also check in with Chair of GovOps, who usually ends up playing some role in organizing when and how we address them. I don't know when we're going to start doing those Friday confirmations. So I'll check on the schedule. But it won't be sooner than 2 weeks, is my thought. All right. There's another. So S124. Where are we? Sorry, I don't have the calendar up yet. I looked last night and it wasn't posted yet. Senator McCormick, you're up to 3rd reading today. Okay. We can't hear you at the moment.
I said, no one has given me a heads up. I'm not expecting any trouble.
Okay. All right. Senator McDonald, you took care of 102 yesterday. We're up to 3rd reading on that today. I guess I'm just checking in to see if we've had any pushback on what we've proposed since we had the floor.
No pushback. The Agriculture Committee was most gracious in joining us as we helped to achieve their goals. So I failed yesterday to deal with the second half of the amendment, which was to have the department report back, the agency report back on how well it was going and any recommendations. I'm not going to bring that up today, but the purpose of that, if anybody asks, was to perhaps there's some changes that would make more of these amended soils available to be shipped off the farms and the places to do good work, and that might be a change that would be forthcoming. But I'm not going to. I don't intend to bring anything up before third reading unless asked. Yep.
I would just say that a report back requirement, if somebody said something to someone on the appropriate committee in the other body, that's something they might consider.
Yep.
Okay. And 101, I think, is we ran out of time before we got to 101. So I'll be offering our amendment on 101, and things seem to have calmed down some there. I was saying when the delegation was in, the bright side to me of people raising that it's a real issue, it's there, it came to the fore over making new connections. So
just the hookups.
Let's use it.
Said the hookup business.
Yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I pondered the dilemma that we face over the weekend, and I did a little research, and I must say Senator Westman's remarks last week were important. The number one, and what I found a couple times, was that the number one way that municipalities can help in the global warming problem is infill. It showed up over a couple of different places, and it was interesting. Weatherization was I think fifth, and given a choice between global warming, which will do us all in if we don't deal with it, and the problems of sewage overflows, which we'll have time to deal with if we survive global warming. I will promise to quit smoking in 5 to 10 years, and but deal with global warming today. So I appreciate your patience with me on this one, and I will support the amendment, and hope that we keep our eye on the most important ball.
Yeah, it's definitely, this is not sort of a good place for us to be, but it is where we are. Senator Westman, yeah.
I would really say after today, if there was a way that we could find with some of this COVID money, or this new batch of federal money coming down, even if it took some match of our own state dollars, if we could find a way to increase that pipeline for treatment plants, and get more of them to the point where they're ready to expand, I think that would be very important for us to do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one of the most helpful things I think that I heard this morning was that too many projects that could receive money are not in a state yet where they can receive federal money. So it sounds like if we invest to help them get into a position ready to receive federal support, we can leverage our investment in a big way, as Canada.
That would seem to me to be probably one of the most important things we could do of anything to help our waterways.
Right. Thanks. And Senator Westman, I had wanted to double back to 101 because I really wanted to make sure I understood your reservations about the amendment, and I don't think I fully do. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I just really want to understand you were talking about pressure in town. If we're more restrictive in town, then you're going to push development to outside a center. And
if someone mentioned at some point a moratorium on development in towns because of sewage,
right.
The more difficult we're going to have development and we're going to have building unless we say no building everywhere. And if you're going to have development, the more difficult you make it to build in town centers, the more development there's going to be out in the countryside. And when somebody puts a new driveway in or a new road in, there's runoff off from that, and you have to cut forests to do it.
Right.
So it isn't just about the septic tank. It just isn't about the wastewater going out. It is really what's the overall impact of that. And the more we cut our countryside up, the more you have other effects. And I think Senator McDonald highlighted a piece of that today. And, we need to, for me, stand back and say, what's the big picture? What's our number one goal? And my number one goal in this relates to as much of the development as we can create, we need to concentrate in our villages, in our village centers, to stop the breakup of our land and be able to, over the long term, most effective in dealing with the issue. If I can get a pipeline and I can fix treatment plants, I can, I grew up in the age in the 1960s and early 70s when treatment plants came on board. It changed the nature of all of our streams in the state. When I look at the Lamoille River, my mother wouldn't let us near the river when I was a kid because everybody straight piped. It's much better than it was then. We need upgrades to those plants that were built when I was a child. And the more we develop in village centers, the more pressure there is to do that. And it becomes a definable problem, not people spread all over the place that there's no turning back from.
Right. Okay. So, and so that's why the part then that I didn't quite fully understand was because my take on the amendment that we're bringing on 101 is that it actually supports infill development by allowing, the permitting to be of equal quality, but carried out at the municipal level. And so that's when you were not signing on to that amendment. I'm not trying to talk you into anything. I said,
No,
maybe I'm misunderstanding something about this.
We started the discussion in this committee
Yeah.
way further back than that. We
Yeah.
started in this committee, and the testimony we took started off on a foot that was quite contrary.
Yeah.
And the final step was something that was I'm much more amenable to than where we were when it started. I really, though, don't want to feed into any of the fervor that is around this that says, no, we don't want to concentrate our development.
Right.
And I just think, you know, we've spent a lot of time in our environmental control, concentrating on the septic tank, concentrating on wastewater and where it goes. And we rarely stand back and say, what's best for the environment overall? And what can we accomplish the quickest to the, and I totally agree with the senator from Orange. Global warming is the health of the whole planet.
Okay.
And that has to be first now.
Okay. Well, great. Okay. Yeah, I hope it didn't feel like I was challenging you. I just wanted to make sure I understood, and because I know you're thinking carefully about the whole thing. So,
Senator Bray, you have 7 minutes before you have to.
okay. All right. So, in terms of what's next, we have the community scale renewable energy bill. Tomorrow is sort of, that's the theme of the day, is looking at that. Next week, I figure we'll have, I would ask everyone to think about what you want to do next. I think, you know, other than dotting some I's or T's on weatherization, we're pretty much there.
Excuse me.
And then I'd like to know what people see as a priority to follow on in
with apologies, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I'm reporting to this joint session,
Okay.
so I'm going to leave this meeting now.
Right. Yep. And we'll wrap up in a minute. Thanks. I would just invite people to think about what feels like the most important work for us to take on for the roughly 4 to 6 weeks that we have left. I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything about adjournment yet. But if it were to happen on the near side, we'd only have 4 weeks as a morning committee.
I just want to mention again that I would like to have Commissioner Snyder in to give us that plan as it relates. I'll leave that in the hands of the chair unless you want me to reach out to him.
Yeah, right. I think your question was to him was, if we've seen a turnaround in the last decade and we're losing forest land, what's the plan to reverse that change? Right? Okay. So I will
be interested in continuing this conversation as it relates to PFOA in Bennington, and then the overflow stuff. I mean, this is a big issue, and I don't want to lose sight of it. And I think we have to really hone in on it more.
Well, and it sounds like a very opportune time to be doing that with the availability of money to help actually do more than in a normal year. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Senator Campion, would you please reach out directly to Commissioner Snyder on behalf of the committee and sort of restate our request?
If I may I ask Jude to do that? It just seems
Certainly.
like the right process, because just thinking on my other hat, we usually, I would rather leave it to Jude.
Okay.
Seems more appropriate.
All right. And Jude, if you have a question about what the request is, if you would just follow up with Senator Campion.
Yeah, I will. I do have a question, so I will email him.
Okay, great. So thank you, everyone. And